Hello, welcome back to Asian Cinema Season 2, and this will be the start of a number of videos on the films, the works, the life and the times of the legendary, the master, Bruce Lee. Now this is something I've really wanted to do for a very long time, because the films of Bruce Lee, and you know, I think I maybe did a video when I bought this last year saying, you know, the 5 Bruce Lee movies that he ever made, and someone corrected me saying, no, he's been in other movies and stuff. Yeah, he appeared in other movies and even TV series and so on, but I think that like Bruce Lee as that kind of iconic martial arts master in a starring role in a movie have happened really 5 times in The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, The Way of the Dragon, Game of Death, and Enter the Dragon. And this box set collects those 5 films in some fairly nice restored editions. I know there's a lot of controversy about these films. There's all different transfers and stuff. People talk about the color timing, the English dubs. I have very little experience with Bruce Lee, so none of that really counters into, you know, I'm not even revisiting these films. There's only 2 that I've seen before. That's Enter the Dragon and Way of the Dragon. I seem to like the Dragon movies. So as far as the other 3, no preconceptions, no kind of how I want it to look or sound or anything like that. So diving into these is going to be really interesting, and I've done one already, which of course is the subject of this video, and that is The Big Boss. So The Big Boss is Bruce Lee's first film from 1971. Again, his first kind of starring leading role film. And I don't know too much about Bruce Lee. I did watch the kind of biography on this Blu-ray, which is a very basic black and white images with kind of very sterile, robot-like voiceover telling you the life and times of Bruce Lee and what happened to him along the way. A very kind of Cliff Notes version of his life and career as a martial artist and also as a movie star. So it seems that he went over to Hong Kong to make movies in the early 70s and made The Big Boss, which was a production he wasn't too happy with. He wasn't too happy with the director and things like that, the way he was putting the film together and not putting as much time and effort into it. And I was really intrigued to hear that actually Bruce Lee didn't like one of the beats in one of the action scenes in the film where he kicks or punches someone and they fly through the wall of this house, structure, building. They go through a wall, a wooden wall, and it leaves like a cartoony kind of like silhouette. And when that happened in the film, I was like, ugh. Oh, that's just, no, that's way too cartoony. And apparently Bruce Lee, you know, that's what he thought at the time and argued against it, but ultimately relented. Obviously at that time he wasn't the megastar that he would become, and this is clearly the film that must have surely launched him into the stratosphere and was a very successful movie. So again, I'm a real novice. My dad is a big Bruce Lee fan. Growing up, he had the 5 videotapes of all of his movies, and I don't know why I never watched all of them. I feel like I would have, but The Way of the Dragon was the one that I think I borrowed from him and watched many times. So that's my Bruce Lee movie, The Way of the Dragon, which I'm looking forward to revisiting. But Big Boss is completely new to me. I just remember when I was a kid, my dad telling me there's one with an ice factory. And I'm imagining like ice everywhere, and it's not quite the same in this movie. And I don't have too much to say about this one, and I would love to do like real in-depth videos on these movies, because I'm really intrigued by Bruce Lee as not even so much a martial artist and an actor, but as just this larger-than-life character and person and legend of cinema. You know, it's one of those weird kind of intriguing things where he, you know, died extremely young, like 32 I think, at least in his early 30s, and so he never really got to, you know, I mean, imagine Bruce Lee working for another 10-15 years in movies, you know, at that kind of physical peak, doing that kind of martial arts stuff. I mean, we could have seen some of the greatest action movies ever. Maybe some people think we already have. I don't actually know what the general consensus is on, even on Bruce Lee's movies themselves. I just know people, you know, they kind of have a very special place in their hearts and minds for Bruce Lee. In my head, I'm thinking Enter the Dragon is the one, because that was like the Warner Brothers production, a bit more of a kind of, again, production, you know, it just felt like more of a big deal, or feels like more of a big deal looking back. Or maybe people hold the Hong Kong movies in much higher esteem and regard. So The Big Boss, I don't know if it's like considered a classic, but for me, I was not a fan of it. Really disappointing. You know, I'd kind of built it up in my head like, this is going to be great. I'm finally going to sit down and watch these movies, and the story didn't quite go out the way that I wanted it to, both as far as the story of the movie itself and the story of me finally seeing these movies and in high definition for the first time. So The Big Boss, and I'm not going to remember character names or anything like that, and I wouldn't want to try and butcher them either, but Bruce Lee, he comes into town, he's made a promise to his mother, he's not going to fight, he has this kind of medallion around his neck that he pulls out and holds when a situation breaks out, and he's like, I can't fight, I'm going to stay away from violence. And he comes to work at this ice factory with some of his family, I guess. I mean, they keep talking about second uncles and cousins and things like that, so I'm not sure exactly if it's one of those where it's like they call each other uncle and cousin and brother. Brother's a word used a lot in these films that I've seen so far, but they don't really mean, you know, an actual, you know, familial brother slash uncle. Not sure about that, but regardless, he comes in, he has a connection, and so he starts work at the ice factory, and there's a lot of corruption going on there. And we have a boss, a foreman, a manager, and then the big boss who kind of stays at his mansion very, very evilly. You know, he's one step removed from kind of straight. In fact, there is, I think, a moment where someone is doing this, but I think it's more in the case of it's showing that the character is thinking about something, so the character's like... And there's a lot of that in this film. There's a lot of really overplayed acting, which is, you know, it's not the best. It really isn't. And there's one thing in this film that just completely threw me for a loop, because it reminded me of my very first film that I made 20 years ago when I was 11 years old. In that film, Wild Wild Wales, I'm the bad guy, and the good guy gets the gun, and he shoots me. And I'm there like that, oh no, he's going to shoot me. And then he pulls the trigger, the little cap goes off, bang, and then we turn the camera off. I stayed in that position. My nan ran in and got some tomato sauce out of out of a ketchup bottle, put it on my head, and then we turned the camera on again, and I'm like, like that. And there is a shot in The Big Boss that is just like that. It staggered me how close it was, just in terms of even the way that the villain is like, in this really like ridiculous way, but also how he stops, and you see the camera cut where they put the blood in, and it's not like it's trickling down, like it just appears out of nowhere. And you know, it's not the worst thing in the world, but I was like, that was like my first film when I was 11 years old. But the fight scenes are pretty good. I was really underwhelmed by Bruce Lee, I have to say, but I will confirm, because I'm kind of working my way through these films, I have seen a film now where I think Bruce Lee is amazing. So, you know, at first I was thinking, wow, was he really not as good as I'm thinking that he was? But, you know, I think in this film the choreography maybe just wasn't quite there. A lot of the fighting is very, you know, telegraphed at times, and some of the cutting is a little bit weird. I mean, it's not bad, it really isn't, but it just doesn't feel like it serves him as well. And I liked how they held off on him fighting, but it's different because when this film first came out, you know, he was taking over, I think, from the lead role. It wasn't like, you know, oh, Bruce Lee's for, you know, who really knew who he was at this point, really. So, you know, in my head, where I'm sat now in 2019, watching the first Bruce Lee starring role, I'm thinking, oh, I'm getting ready for like the first Bruce Lee action scene, but no one was doing that when the film was made. So to me, the fact that they're holding off him fighting is like, oh yeah, great, because he's Bruce Lee. But that's not how it would have been when they made the movie. But it kind of works that way, kind of retroactively, I think, which is kind of nice. And I like the story. It's dragged a little bit, you know. But I think by the end, it's just a really down ending, you know, like he beats all the bad guys, but then at what cost, you know, and maybe that's a kind of a different ending for a movie like this, but it was just a very brutal ending, and then, you know, I just felt a little bit empty at the end. I was left feeling empty at the end of the movie, and so I was just like, it's just underwhelming, I think, overall. And there's some interesting things, how they're smuggling heroin inside these ice blocks. I like that thing. There's a really dark moment with the ice blocks towards the end, which I thought, fuck, like that really went to a pretty dark place. And then even like out of nowhere, sometimes the fights will get really violent. There's this infamous kind of deleted scene where Bruce Lee takes a saw and just digs it into a guy's head, and just it goes right through his skull. There's like pictures of it, like production stills, but the footage has never been officially released, or so I've read into. So they kind of go a bit kind of brutal with some of the violence, but you know, a lot of it is just the, you know, the punching and the kicking, and yeah, I don't know, I enjoyed it, but for me it's very kind of middle of the road, you know. the story didn't grab me as much. I was intrigued to see every scene he was in, but really only because it's Bruce Lee. If I had removed any preconception I had, I should say, of this being Bruce Lee, this legend, I would have gravitated towards him actually, because I think he has this unique charisma that he just exudes it. He had a special something, even when he's just standing there looking at something. You know, he certainly didn't blow me away with his acting, but he has a screen presence that cannot be denied. But, you know, as far as the way that his fighting was in the movie and the choreography, I certainly would have been like, oh wow. But then I guess people were, because back then in 1971 this was huge and just exploded, and kind of his career kind of very quickly burned very brightly until his untimely passing. But for me overall, you know, and of course they don't shoot the sound. I should talk about this a little bit before I finish the video. They didn't shoot with sound, they dubbed it all afterwards in Mandarin, and it took me a while to figure out how do I watch this movie, because there's the English dub, which a lot of people love because it reminds them of the way they grew up with these movies. I didn't. Well, in the case of Way of the Dragon I did, but I watched Way of the Dragon when I was really young. I never continued watching it into my teenage years, so I don't really remember the English dub enough to... Or maybe I do, I don't know, maybe it would jog my memory. But anyway, so the English dub is a no-no for me. Mandarin apparently is the language they dubbed it into originally. Then there was also a Cantonese track, and I believe that Bruce Lee spoke Cantonese, even in the movie, but then it's dubbed in Mandarin, so it's really confusing, but I'm sticking with the Mandarin versions, because that's apparently the way that they were first made, and so even the soundtrack is kind of the way it was initially conceived. Apparently the Cantonese version of Big Boss has Pink Floyd songs in it, but of course they couldn't license that for the Blu-ray and just kind of replaced it with like different parts of the score. And I think there's different sound effects. I mean, it's a minefield of stuff that I don't have the time or passion to really dig into and watch every version and listen to all the audio commentaries and things like that. So the sound is an interesting issue. But there's one scene where there's a group of guys who I think that maybe they're advancing on some of the good guys for a fight sequence, and they're all talking and stuff. And you can hear that it's a bunch of guys in a room recording it. Like, you can hear the act. It's an outdoors scene, right? So I think it's outside the mansion where the big boss is. And you just hear that they're in a room, and it really tickled me for some reason. It's just like, of course they're in a room, and you can very clearly hear the kind of you can almost like picture in your mind through your ears the kind of the walls and kind of the way that the sound is bouncing off them. It's just, yeah, very funny. And it also tickled me because I had done the Zatoichi marathon, where I watched like 26 movies in very short succession, and I was not going to be remembering names of the characters, and so I often said there's the boss and then the big boss. And in this, it literally is called The Big Boss, though apparently the original title was Fists of Fury. And the next Bruce Lee movie is called Fist of Fury. So there's all these kind of titles, confusions, and I'm just like, I'm thinking I might be even making mistakes here. That might not even be the case, but it's funny to... And it always makes you think of that scene in The Office where he's like, you know, you're thinking of Enter the Dragon, it's Way of the Dragon. Say it, Way of the Dragon.
No, I've not seen him fight Chuck Norris in Enter the Dragon. I've seen him fight Chuck Norris in Way of the Dragon.
That's what I meant.
Is it?
Yeah.
Why did you say you'd seen him fight Chuck Norris in Enter the Dragon?
So when he's fighting Chuck Norris...
In what?
In Way of the Dragon.
Correct, at last.
So Bruce Lee's movies have been titled, I think there's like The Chinese Connection is one of them, and an alternate title, who knows. But The Big Boss, for me, ultimately, I don't know if I'd even want to watch it again, you know, maybe in 10, 15 years or so. I need to speak to my dad, see what he thinks, and see what anyone else thinks. I don't know how these films proceed, which is kind of interesting and refreshing, actually, to not sit there and go, okay, this is supposed to be a classic, because I don't know that. I haven't really looked into it too much. So for me, my kind of, you know, fresh viewing of it, not great. I think I rated it like 2.5 out of 5. It just very much in the middle for me. Bruce Lee carries it and saves it because he has that presence, and there's glimpses of his greatness in the martial arts there at times. But apart from that, you know, it was just kind of interesting for the historical perspective of it being his first movie, far more than anything else that was going on inside the actual movie itself with the story or anything like that. So quite disappointing. But the next one I kind of enjoyed a little bit more, so you'll hear about that in the next video. I will be talking about all 5 of them, and Enter the Dragon will be an episode of the Epic Film Challenge too. So there'll be 4 in this kind of little run of videos, I suppose, and maybe afterwards I'll kind of come back, I don't know. I kind of feel like with some of these mini sections I'm doing in Asian Cinema Season 2, I should do like a roundup at the end, but I haven't quite decided if I'm going to do that yet, if I have enough to talk about. But yeah, The Big Boss, I'm glad I've seen it, you know, but... I did expect a little bit more, just because it is Bruce Lee. but I wasn't too shocked that it wasn't great either. So it's kind of it's an interesting watch. And again, like I said, just to end it here, I don't think I would watch it again, but I will keep it because one, it's part of the box set, which is kind of nice, but I like having it. I like owning his first movie. It's kind of it sounds weird, but just the historical kind of significance of it is cool to me, and that really did carry my enjoyment as the film was really dragging at parts, and certain parts of the story weren't interesting me as much as I would have liked. Anyway, that is my thoughts on The Big Boss. Thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts down below if you have seen that film and what you think of it. If you can offer any kind of perspective on these movies. At the point of me posting this video, I will have seen all of them anyway, so feel free to just throw any kind of discussion points down below. I'd love to chat with you about Bruce Lee's movies, but of course there will be videos coming on all 5 of these films in quick succession on the channel, so you can look forward to those and we can chat about all of them, hopefully. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you.